In the spring of 1220, on the edges of the ancient land of Khorasan, a mother stood frozen as her 14-year-old daughter was dragged away by Mongol soldiers. The girl walked in silence, her eyes fixed on the ground. She knew that struggling, that screaming, would only make things worse. Her name was Zarya. That name, once whispered by her mother in lullabies, was now just another entry in the Mongol military records. Age, height, hair, body type, everything catalogued with bureaucratic precision. She was no longer a daughter, no longer a child. She had become data. But Zarya's fate was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of something far larger, an imperial system that weaponized the female body. Conquest wasn't just about capturing land or treasure. It was about controlling populations. Maternity itself had been transformed into a political resource, recorded not in the chronicles of victory, but hidden in the genetic memory of generations. This wasn't simply military expansion. It was biological integration. The caravans of captives in the 12th and 13th centuries explain why, centuries later, genetic studies reveal traces of Mongol blood in millions across Eurasia. The true power of Genghis Khan wasn't just in his campaigns. It was in the human legacy he engineered with chilling precision. This is the story of how one man turned reproduction into an instrument of empire, and why its echoes still haunt the present. To understand how we arrived here, we must return to Mongolia in 1162, when a boy named Temujin was born into a world where survival meant taking what others had. His tribe was poor, marginalized, constantly harassed by stronger clans. When Temujin was only 9, his father was poisoned by tribal rivals. His mother, Hoelun, was left with several children to feed. They survived on roots, raw fish, anything the earth or rivers would spare. For young Temujin, the world divided into two categories: those who take and those who are taken. At 16, he faced his first defining loss. His promised bride, Berta, was kidnapped by a rival tribe. For months he searched desperately, haunted by whispers of her fate. Violated, forced into another man's bed, or perhaps already dead. When Temujin finally found her, Berta was alive, but pregnant. Whose child she carried, he could never know. Yet something crystallized in him that night, a cold calculation. Women were not just spoils of war, they were the future, and whoever controlled that future controlled the world. Temujin began to build power with a vision that went beyond warfare. He noticed what others ignored. After battles, enemy tribes mourned their dead for days. Warriors took their own lives rather than submit. But the women, they endured. They adapted. They bore children, and those children would grow up knowing who had conquered their mothers. To Temujin, this was not a threat. It was an opportunity. If he could systematize control over reproduction, he wouldn't need to garrison every conquered city forever. The people would, in time, become Mongol from the inside out. By 1206, when the tribes of the steppe proclaimed him Great Khan, Genghis Khan, his vision had already taken shape. His administrators would later call it the system of permanent seeding. It was not abstract philosophy, it was military protocol. And the experiments had already begun. The first large-scale trial came in 1209 against the Tangut Kingdom. The Mongols did not descend like savage raiders. They advanced like a machine. Alongside warriors rode scribes, administrators, and physicians trained in female anatomy. Weeks before the siege, spies slipped into Tangut cities to conduct secret censuses. How many women? What ages? What family lines? every detail written on scrolls that became the first industrial records of sexual violence in history. When the cities fell, the Mongols executed or enslaved the men. But the women, they were divided with surgical precision. Primary reproducers, ages 14 to 30, no visible defects. Secondary reproducers, 31 to 40, preferably with children already. Discard, under 14, over 40, or sick. The first two categories were branded with ink on their wrists and sent into caravans built to follow the army. The third group disappeared. These caravans were unlike anything seen before. They were rolling cages, designed specifically for human processing. Compartments separated the newly captured from the already pregnant. One wagon carried women who had recently given birth. Another confined those deemed unproductive, awaiting gradual elimination. Mongol physicians experimented with herbs that sped ovulation, diets that boosted fertility, even crude surgical attempts to fix reproductive problems. Women were no longer people. They were breeding stock. The bureaucracy was relentless. Every violation recorded, every pregnancy documented, every birth classified. Infants judged by their physical traits. Promising babies were raised as Mongols. The rest were quietly destroyed. Women lost their names the day they were captured. From then on, they were numbers tattooed into flesh. Identification codes, tribal origin, reproductive history, estimated value. Some whispered their true names into their babies' ears, hoping the sound might survive. Others carved marks into their own skin to remember who they once were. But the system crushed individuality with terrifying efficiency. Within a single generation, these women had become shadows of themselves. By 1211, when Genghis Khan turned against the Jin Empire of northern China, the machinery was perfected. The Mongols were no longer just conquering territories. They were conquering wombs. In one campaign, they seized Chengdu, capturing more than 40,000 women of reproductive age. By 1213, records show over 100,000 women moving in caravans that stretched for miles behind the main army. The process was now industrial. Capture, classify, condition, violate, impregnate, birth, reassign. Babies born into the system faced their own sorting. Those with sufficiently Mongol features were removed from their mothers and raised within Mongol households. The rest were eliminated at birth. Resistance had protocols too. Women who refused food were force-fed until their will broke. Those who tried to abort were shackled under constant guard. Those who mutilated themselves to become barren were kept alive just long enough to serve as warnings. And the most heartbreaking of all, mothers who killed their own infants to deny them to the empire. They faced public torture. Their agony turned into spectacle, ensuring others would not follow. Genghis Khan was no longer just waging war. He was waging biology. He wasn't satisfied with temporary conquest, for territories could rebel or be reclaimed. Instead, he designed a system that conquered the very genetics of nations. Each pregnant captive was a seed of permanent conquest, planted in the future. By 1220, caravans of more than 200,000 women stretched from Mongolia to Eastern Europe. The empire had built an entire logistical network dedicated to them. Supply stations to inspect reproductive units, field hospitals for forced births, sorting centers where each newborn's fate was decided. The horror wasn't only in the violence, it was in the orderliness. Every act of brutality was catalogued like livestock. Every woman reduced to numbers, every child weighed against imperial codes. This was conquest turned into bureaucracy, evil transformed into efficiency. The women trapped inside this system found ways to resist, even when resistance seemed impossible. Their defiance wasn't always physical. It was hidden, subtle, and whispered in the shadows. They developed secret codes of gestures to share information, warnings about escape routes, instructions for inducing miscarriages, even methods for poisoning their own breast milk to kill infants without detection. Some forced themselves to vomit after meals, starving their bodies until pregnancies became less likely. Others cut themselves in strategic places, infecting wounds to trigger fevers that threatened both them and their unborn children. But the most haunting resistance was emotional. They created rituals to preserve memory, soft chants in forgotten languages, songs carried through the night air of the steppe, names of children whispered again and again so they would not vanish. Even as their bodies were broken, these women fought to ensure something of their humanity survived. They knew death was inevitable, yet survival, in memory and spirit, became its own form of victory. By 1219, the system had reached a level of refinement that shocked entire civilizations. When Genghis Khan turned his armies against the Khwarezmian Empire, he unleashed not just an invasion, but a perfected machine of human harvesting. The Mongols no longer improvised. They had protocols for everything, different strategies for different types of cities, tailored approaches for various cultures. Intelligence networks scouted ahead, cataloging not only women but their families, skills, and emotional ties. All of it weaponized to break spirits and maximize compliance. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv fell not only to military power, but to an industrial process of separation. Families were torn apart with clinical precision. The Mongols had learned that keeping mothers with small children for the first 3 months made them more cooperative. But after that period, separating them shattered resistance permanently. Even social status was exploited. Noble women were singled out for special treatment, not out of compassion, but calculation. They were violated by high-ranking officers and given slightly better conditions. Why? Because their offspring often carried refined physical traits. Such children could be absorbed into the aristocracy more easily, strengthening the Mongol elite. Peasant women, by contrast, were processed in bulk. Their value lay in endurance, the ability to survive pregnancy in brutal conditions and produce strong, resilient children. Mongol physicians pushed their knowledge further. They experimented with herbs to trigger multiple ovulations, hoping for twins or even triplets. They monitored early signs of pregnancy with obsessive detail, adjusting diets to minimize complications. Everything was geared toward one objective: turn every womb into a factory of empire. By 1220, the scale defied comprehension. Records describe caravans of women that stretched for days, marching in step like a second shadow army. Each caravan had divisions with specialized roles: initial capture, classification, acclimatization, early pregnancy, late pregnancy, childbirth, infant care, postpartum, and finally, reassignment or elimination. Every division had its own administrators, physicians, guards, and strict protocols. The caravans were like mobile cities of horror, complete with wagons that served as hospitals, prison tents for women in different stages, and even morgue wagons to dispose of the dead. It was an empire built not only on conquest, but on the systematic processing of human lives. But the true genius and the true evil of the system lay not in its efficiency, but in its permanence. Genghis Khan understood what other conquerors never grasped. Territory could be lost, but genes were forever. Each child born into the system carried the Mongol imprint, and those children would have children, and their children would continue the line. The conquest did not end when a battle was won. It lived on in the blood of every descendant. Modern genetic studies confirm this chilling truth. Analysis of the Y chromosome reveals that roughly 16 million men alive today descend directly from Genghis Khan and his immediate family. That's 1 out of every 200 men on Earth. In Mongolia, the percentage climbs to nearly 8%. Across Central Asia, it hovers around 3%. Even in Eastern Europe, where Mongol campaigns were brief, the genetic signature lingers. The numbers are staggering, but they don't tell the full story. Because the system wasn't confined to Genghis Khan alone. His sons, grandsons, and generals carried it forward. Ogedei Khan refined the methods in Europe. Mongke Khan applied them in the Middle East. Kublai Khan extended them into China. What began as a campaign tactic became imperial doctrine, handed down as dynastic tradition,